Chapter 3. Moving Day. I won't be able to make it. George had reacted flatly to Joy's hastily concocted safari plans. To Africans, a safari is any trip, not simply a foray to look at or hunt wild animals, and the safari that Joy was planning was to be all work. The Adamsons had sold their home in Isolo in the northern frontier district and bought a new one on Lake Naivasha, 95 miles northwest of Nairobi. The Meru park warden had consented to let them use a park truck, or lorry, to transfer their belongings, but he had been advised in late February that he was being reassigned at the beginning of March, leaving the Adamsons a week to take advantage of his generosity. Although we hadn't quite accepted George's determined stand, when we left camp that morning, he hadn't shown up. With every turn of the wheels, the atmosphere inside Joy's Land Rover stiffened. Suddenly, we spotted his pickup bumping toward us from a sidetrack, and I breathed easier. "I'm looking forward to my first safari," I announced, proud to be accompanying the Adamsons to the home where Elsa had been raised and set free. Joy acknowledged, preoccupied by the work that faced us and by George. As our caravan left behind the dryness of the park and penetrated deeper into the verdant Nyambene mountain range with its tiny villages dotting the route, she nursed her ire at him for having kept us in suspense. 2. The road had disintegrated into both an obstacle course of stones, gullies and potholes, and a waffle grid of footprints left by thousands of cattle. The jostling, I realized, couldn't be comforting to her neck. Therefore, joining Joy's silence, I concentrated on the panorama. The population I glimpsed so close to the park intrigued and frightened me. The numbers, comprised mainly of Meru tribesmen, were as vast as was the park's emptiness, and I wondered how long that emptiness could survive. A small but robust people, the Merus presented slanted eyes, high cheekbones, happy faces, and toothy smiles to the world. With great loads of kindling strapped to their broad backs, women of all ages shuffled barefooted along the red roads. Heavy water gourds balanced nobly atop heads, as babies rode, slung haphazardly across wide hips. "Don't the men work?" I implored finally, after so many, mounted grandly on shiny bicycles and blithely chatting with the overburdened females, had flitted by the vehicle's window. "They haven't much to do with the shambas, the houses, I mean, and there's little work for them elsewhere," Joy told me. Shortly thereafter, she said brusquely, "Well, take a good look. We're not stopping. This is Meru." A strange, dark, rustic township, Meru demonstrated the intermingling of ethnic influences common to African settlements. The gas station was owned and operated by turbaned East Indians. The quaint log cabin-style motel was run by a British couple, and a combination of Africans and Asians kept the marketplace humming in the town's center. To me, though, Meru will forever mean flame trees. Like the stately, sheltering elms that line the residential streets of so many small cities in the U.S., Meru's flame trees, which were in riotous red bloom, created an embrace of gnarled boughs over our heads and cooled our passage. Outside Meru, we drew to the summit of the Maua escarpment, 7,800 feet above sea level. There we seemed to have arrived at the very top of the world. To the ends of the earth, the fabled northern frontier district, mysterious in its endless aridity, spread itself before us. "Those are Elsa's hills. Elsa's land. Isn't it glorious? So many places we went together, Elsa and I," Joy murmured to herself. "I know, Joy, I know," I said gently, thinking. "But I don't know. I didn't know, Elsa." For Joy, I had discovered, Elsa had never died. Suddenly I felt uncomfortable in the presence of that past, as the ghost of the lioness hunched down beside us on our journey to Isolo. With the mountain's greenness receding into the background, the day grew hotter and hotter. When we stopped for lunch, as far as our eyes could perceive, a flat nothingness reigned. It reminded me of the seemingly endless miles of desert that one encounters in a trip across New Mexico. Suddenly, as though they had been conjured up by an alchemist, two African teenagers pulled their noisy vehicle to a stop next to Joy's, a transistor radio blaring from their car seat. Over the din of the raucous rock and roll, we shouted in reply to their inquiry that we didn't need help. We thanked them, and off they whizzed as fast as they had materialized in the first place. Having gathered up our lunch leftovers, we took off too, in a haze of buff-colored dust. Often during the remainder of our jaunt, I thought of those young men and their loud music. Its intrusion into nature's awesome silence had set the teeth of eternity on edge and set me to wondering. By traveling to Kenya, I had sought to escape from such worldly racket. How could those young Africans, blessed with an uninterrupted communion with the music of the spheres, be so insensitive? The next thing I knew, we were turning onto an almost invisible track that threaded its feeble way over a hillock, on whose far side sat the Adamsons' Isolo house. Typical of Kenya's architecture, it had a rectangular midsection, which served as a living dining area, fronted by a veranda. Bedroom and bathroom wings jutted out on either side, while the kitchen and pantry occupied the rear, easily accessible to the servants' quarters. The only servants there, however, were a spear-carrying Turkana caretaker and his family. "George! George!" Joy shouted after we had been at the packing job for 4 hours. "Where did you get this?" George and I collided in the bedroom doorway as he answered her summons. "What do you mean, where did I get it? That's my bedroll bag." It was all I could do to stifle a silly grin as I thought of Twittengrew's and Chaka's epithets the day before, at having to haul back into the store hut the heavy tents and ground sheets that they had hauled out for nothing as Joy searched for her green canvas bedroll bag. Unable to find it, she became convinced that she had loaned it a year ago to some people going to George's camp, and that they had left it there rather than return it. Peevishly, she had stuffed our bedding into the mail sack instead. "Now, George," she bristled, "you know that's my bag." "Why?" he asked mildly. "Have you lost yours?" "You know very well those people last year left mine at your camp, and you just never returned it." "No, Joy," he asserted before he escaped to the workshop shed. "I don't know that. Our bags look exactly alike, but this one is mine. I've no idea where yours is, but I'll have a look for it when I get back." 4 months later, as I was packing in the Hawthorne's Nairobi home for my safari through East Africa's national parks, Tony would offer me a green canvas bag for my bedding that he called the Joy bag. When one of Joy's cheetah cubs had been injured about a year ago and had to be flown to Nairobi, Joy had wrapped him in the bag. After he contracted cat flu and died, the lab sent the canvas to be fumigated, then forwarded it to the Hawthornes. Twice they had tried to give it back, but Joy refused it, telling them it wasn't hers because she knew that hers had been taken to George's camp. "I know that's my bag. I know it is," Joy muttered over and over at George's departing form as she jammed a broom harder and harder onto the concrete floor that was painted a bilious red, impossible to sweep clean. When Joy's ire had been dissipated by her vigorous sweeping, she shifted her attention to a long fabric casing. "Help me straighten this, please," she said, pointing one end of it at me. As we unrolled it, a lion skin unfolded. "That's the man-eater from Born Free that George had to shoot," she told me. "Look how dusty he is, and his hair is coming out in hunks. We're going to have to frame him, that's all. It's so impossible to keep things when you live like we do, never in one place for any time," she complained. Before we rewrapped the pelt, my finger ran involuntarily down one of the hairs in the magnificent black mane. It gave me the shivers. "It's getting late," Joy announced. "We had better do something about dinner. What do you say, Pishi?" "Oh, no, you don't," I protested. "I'm a dreadful cook." But I knew the die was cast. Joy hated anything to do with the kitchen even more violently than I did. "That's just fine," she said mockingly. "What can you do?" Make predictions, I laughed. Only the safe kind, you mean, after the fact. I waltzed right into that one, didn't I? You certainly did. Come on, she prodded. I know you've secretly wanted Choka's job. Now's your chance. In a room that resembled a Pleistocene cave, I opened some cans over kerosene jets, preparing a nondescript but welcome meal that we ate on the veranda by the light of the moon. Elephants used to wander up to there, George observed, picking out with his fork a stone path about 10 feet away. Up to that path the front yard ran, with its orderly, rock-bordered garden and a whimsical bird bath. Bougainvillea covered the veranda roof and trailed along the walls, adding its touch to the small compound of civilization that sat incongruously in the middle of nowhere. During coffee, Joy said nostalgically, I finished living free on this veranda, in that far corner. And in the crystalline night I could almost hear the muffled clack of her old Remington, responding to her one-finger typing technique. Where did you get your title, Born Free? I inquired, gathering up the dishes. From the Bible, actually. Let me see if I can remember the quote. Then the chief captain came and said unto him, she began, Tell me, art thou a Roman? He said, Yea. And the chief captain answered, With a great sum obtained I this freedom. And Paul said, But I was free-born. That's beautiful, I mused. But free-born, I wonder what it really means. Elsa was, Joy elaborated. Then she earned that freedom again. Suppose so, I conceded, thinking. Free to be wild again, but is that really free? When I returned to the porch after clearing the dishes, Joy was issuing instructions to George. When the lorry takes the first load, you and Netta can follow it to Naivasha. I'll go to Meru. We stored the 63 trunks there, if you remember. 63 trunks! My God, I thought. I had slid to the bottom porch step, my mind wandering through the rooms of furniture behind us. Joy's and George's camp bespoke Spartan existences. It had never occurred to me that their home might be otherwise. Joy, I asked, wouldn't I be more help to you in Meru? No, she replied briskly. There won't be enough room in the Land Rover for all your kit and the things I'll take from here. You go with George. Okay. Where did you get that many trunks? We still have George's in mind from Europe, she explained. For years I've been telling myself to get rid of those relics, but I just can't part with Elsa's pictures or her books. I've got copies of every foreign language edition. That's a lot of books. So, we've just kept adding more trunks. By the way, do you remember the letters we wrote about the exhibit in London next fall? The one that wants me to send paintings of the Kenyan flora that I did years ago? Well, guess where those flower paintings are? No, I gulped. In one of the 63 trunks, she said mischievously. And we're going to find them. I can't even picture 63 trunks altogether. You'll do more than that, she replied nonchalantly. It might not be a bad idea for us to clean them out while we're at it. I'm leaving, I joked. Don't worry, she said reassuringly. I've decided to save all that cleaning for my old age. What else will there be for me to do? She paused, her light-sensitive blue eyes searching deep into the moonlit hills. Finally she continued. For the life of me, I can't remember where I put my key box. Every trunk takes a different key. 63 keys? I screeched. But I'll find it, have no fear, she said confidently. I'm going in now. When I've finished my bath, I'll open the door and leave the lamp on. You better have yours straight away and then turn out the light before you go to bed, please. I will. Night, I called. To protect us from something or someone, or perhaps by force of habit in his reactivated Lord of the Manor role, George padded through the dismantled house, locking windows and bolting doors. As I surveyed the piles of belongings ready to load onto the lorry, I thought of my own apartment, filled to overflowing by the same pack rat tendency Joy had. Joy and George have returned animals to the wild, I mused, but like me, they're prisoners of their possessions. Joy must have awakened at daybreak. Maybe she didn't sleep. At any rate, her Land Rover, lightly loaded despite what she had told me, had started toward the main road before I was out of bed, and by the time I had dashed to the porch, all I got was a parting glimpse of the back of her head. When George and I set out after the lorry was loaded, menacing clouds defiled the sky. Finally, it poured. Sheets of rain plummeted down. Only one windshield wiper worked, George's, luckily. It turned so cold that my teeth rattled. I shivered and shook. I had asked Joy what I should pack. Jerseys, was her perfunctory reply as she filled the mail sack with bedding, intent upon her displeasure with George for having kept her bedroll bag. So I had brought several of the lightweight shirts, neglecting to include anything warmer. It was nothing short of miraculous that the lorry completed its 250-mile jaunt when we did, late that afternoon. While George supervised its unloading, I surveyed the new Adamson dwelling, a rambling, one-story home being expanded and remodeled, yet retaining many of the original features. Then I trotted down the sloping lawn for a closer look at a semicircle of fever trees and the papyrus islands floating in Naivasha, the largest of the chain of lakes in the Rift Valley, and wind-blown on that blustery afternoon. With the furniture which Joy and I had stitched so carefully into burlap shrouds unloaded, the lorry departed to meet her at Meru, where Joy would direct the loading of the trunks before the truck returned to Isolo the next day to pick up the remainder of their belongings. Joy had told George that she would leave Meru and join us to spend that night at the Naivasha home. For the next few hours, George and I shuffled across bare wooden floors, sorting furnishings and cartons as best we could. Finally, we collapsed bolt upright on straight-backed chairs borrowed from the caretaker, waiting for Joy. "What do you think?" I asked him when headlights on the road some distance above flashed by. "I don't know where she is," he answered, exasperated. "It's 8:30. I doubt she'll show up now. I think we ought to eat, don't you?" Using George's time-saving method of immersing the entire tin in a pot of hot water, we cooked hash and beans, to which we added bread, butter, a tin of fruit, and coffee. Then we settled down with the stack of old-time magazines we had parceled out for our evening's entertainment. It feels so strange to be marooned, helpless, not to know what to do about Joy or where she is, I reflected, glancing up from my reading. "Joy often goes off alone," George said, drawing on his pipe. "She said she'd meet us here, though, and she was so determined to get this moving done. That's what bothers me." "It's really coming down," he observed, peering through the sliding glass doors. The rain ranted and raved. "George," I ventured finally, "I don't think we'll see Joy again until after we've made the second trip to Isolo. When she took off this morning, I got the feeling that she'd planned it that way, so she would never have to go back to Elsa's home again." George's head dipped to rekindle his pipe. Then he looked up at me thoughtfully. "You may be right," he said softly. The next day we waited until 8:30 before leaving. On the 2-lane road, which Joy would also have taken had she been journeying that morning from Meru to Naivasha, traffic was light. We checked every vehicle to see if it was Joy's, to no avail. She never appeared at Isolo either. George and I passed another dismal, rain-soaked, bone-cold night there, starting the last lap of our round trip at dawn the following day. That evening, a single candle fluttering in Joy's bedroom window at the Naivasha home told us that she had finally turned up. "I wondered what had happened to that," Joy exclaimed at the sight of my 5'2" frame drowned in her old, limp trench coat. "You left it at Isolo, and when you didn't show up there as we'd planned, I grabbed it. I've never been so cold," I said, rubbing my arms to quell the shivers. "Dummy," she declared, cuffing me teasingly on the head as she realized what had happened. "Didn't you know that in the King's English a jersey is a sweater?" "I know it now," I laughed. "Are you hungry? We brought samosas from Nanyuki." "I'm starved. I've been waiting here since 5 o'clock. "You won't believe it, but we spent a day at the Marina Cafe in Nanyuki. It took 5 hours to get a part for the pickup. Where have you been?" I asked as we headed into the main room to dine on the pungent Indian confections. After I left Naramoru on my way here, it started to rain. I got stuck on a detour between Kiambu and Banana Hill. Do you remember that spot, George? Muttering, George was sliding things back and forth in one of his metal cases. It's still a mess, and I was terrified. Finally, some Africans came along. I gave them a few shillingis, and they winched me out. Well, by then it was dark, so I spent the night at the Thompson's Falls Lodge. "That's strange," I countered. "We had breakfast there yesterday morning. Come to think of it, that was the only place we didn't ask about you." "I left there about 7:30. I watched for you too, but when I got here, you'd gone. The caretaker helped me unload the piano. How it survived that Banana Hill episode, I'll never know. Then I went to Nairobi. By the way, George, we have to go to the police tomorrow to tell them we're here, so they can keep an eye on the place." "Fine," he mumbled, still rummaging. "I just stayed in Nairobi last night," she rambled on, "and came out here this afternoon. I couldn't figure out where you were, and I was getting quite angry, I don't mind telling you. Have a pastry," she offered, passing around the second of the bags of food we had brought. "I'm dying of thirst," George announced, going off to find what he couldn't locate in his box. Returning from the storeroom, he lifted his glass and quite a portion of his refreshment vanished. Suddenly, George's hand clamped over his mouth, and he turned beet red and fled. When next he appeared in the doorway, he rasped, "Kerosene!" Embarrassed, floundering, begging for sympathy, he coughed. "Now, you've just got to label those water bottles more carefully." Joy and I began to laugh. It felt so good. We laughed loudly, heartily, boisterously. We laughed and laughed and laughed. Finally, George's face brightened up, and he, too, dissolved in laughter. "Well, you didn't see a single wild animal on your first African safari, but now you've got something to write home about, haven't you?" Joy chortled. "I hadn't thought about it like that," I managed to reply, the tears rolling down my cheeks.